Crescendo! Hello everyone, Ron again, and in this video we're going to talk about crescendos and decrescendos. Action.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
So what is a crescendo and what is a decrescendo? A crescendo means that the volume or gain slowly rises over time or quickly rises over time, simply that it rises to an eventual point of max loudness, a climax if you will. And decrescendo is the opposite. When something goes from a louder point of volume or gain and it becomes quieter over time steadily. So today we're going to look at that concept as it relates to rhythm. Now, why would you use a crescendo or a decrescendo? If you're thinking of how a crescendo is, because a crescendo's nature is to rise over time, they're very good for emphasizing something, because when something is crescendoing, it is going to naturally draw more attention to the listener. Think about if somebody was running towards you and say they were at a steady volume even, but they were just yelling out your name. That would be a crescendo. They would get louder as they approach you because they're getting closer, which incidentally is a second reason to use a crescendo in something. If you want it to sound like it's getting closer, that's a very good way to do it when you incorporate reverb because of how we perceive distance. So yeah, you can emphasize something because it's sort of like it's showing up, and it's coming closer and more near to you if there's a sound. I'm going to demonstrate that in this video, but that's one takeaway. So another reason is that you want something to drop, right? Like, when the beat drops and it sounds hard and it knocks and all that. You want something to slowly build towards that. There's a technique that people use when dealing with reverb that I did not mention in my reverb videos, but this is a good time to talk about it, where they will take a sound, and if you look right here, this is Sampler, which is also an FL Studio native plugin, and it does exactly what it sounds like. You take a sound from somewhere, like here, for example, you drop it in there, and it samples that sound. And you can modulate the pitch in a bunch of different parameters. You go here, there's ADSR, which is covered in another video, LFOs, which are covered in another video, low pass filters, which are covered in the vocal chain series when I was explaining subtractive EQ, and resonance, which is covered in the same place, but this time we're using it productively rather than taking it out. Here you've got panning. You can modulate panning with an LFO. You have mod X, which is the low pass filter, mod Y, which is the resonance. You can modulate all of that. And pitch. So you can make something become higher and lower in pitch over time repeatedly. But we're dealing with volume because this is about crescendos. Though it's interesting to mention that if you did want to make something sound closer, you could affect the pitch, because if something is getting farther away from you, there's a phenomenon that happens called the Doppler Effect. And basically it is the phase of the sound that you're hearing changing. So it causes it to sound like it's getting lower or higher in pitch. An example is when a police car or a fire truck goes past you really fast, and then it sounds like the siren is getting lower. That's called the Doppler effect. And that's something you can account for if you want to make something sound closer. You can change the pitch of it as it relates to where the listener would be over time. I've actually done that in one song. It was pretty cool. But that's an aside. It's extra material. Though it is sort of like a decrescendo or a crescendo because it's a rise or decrease in pitch. Though it's not technically the same thing, because it's a rise or decrease in pitch and not volume. So there you go. But someone would take a sound that's like this. You can reverse the sound too. So if I reverse it, you will see that the sound grows rather than to decrease. It is a transient, so it is going to still be a short sound, but it becomes a crescendo. That's what a crescendo would look like as an audio file. And this is what a decrescendo would look like as an audio file. Go to history, go down, and undo that, because I want it to still be the same. So why would you use a decrescendo, right? Because you would obviously want to make something sound closer or emphasize it musically. But it occurs that a decrescendo would do the opposite. Like if you have a point of very high impact, which I am going to display in this video too, then you want to diffuse that tension and you want to transition into a quieter section of a song, right? Because when we were on drumline, if you're familiar with the term drum break, and these happen in songs too, like when there's a drum fill, that's another name for it. There's some period of time during a song where the drums basically get to wall out and they play solos and stuff like that, rather than the predominant sustaining character that many songs have that is reliant upon tonal instruments such as brass and violins and woodwinds. But after the drum break, or even around it in some cases, there would be a ballad. And a ballad is a very soft type of song. And so you can't just go from everything being at 12 to just all of a sudden it's quiet, because that's weird. So that's where crescendos and decrescendos, or fermatas, which is another interesting thing that I would like to talk about because I really don't see them used in mainstream music. But those are the types of things that they do. They either transition, or in the case of a fermata, it's sort of like a pause, like a comma even. So those are the three things that we're going to look at. Emphasizing a sound, as in this sound is taking center stage. For a hard drop, and to diffuse tension. All of that is going to happen in this one audio example, and it's actually segregated into 3 different portions. But first, I'm going to explain to you how I did it. So thinking back to the ADSR video, I modulated the attack time. I modulated the low pass filter, which is mod X, so that it opens up, which means it's letting in more high frequencies over time, and then it will reverse. And I modulated the channel volume because this is a video about crescendos. What you'll notice is, with the attack time increased ever so slightly, the sound becomes just a little bit softer, and it does kind of sound like a marching snare drum, if I'm honest, because of how it's playing. And it becomes ever so slightly softer, so that during its big impact, the roughness of the sound comes back when the attack time is dropped, meaning that the transient is reaching max volume immediately. So that is the point where it is the most dynamic. And then it increases back to having a slight attack time to make it a soft sound again as it decrescendos. The filter opens up and then it closes when it decrescendos. And obviously, the volume is going to crescendo to the high point, remain there, and then it's going to decrescendo. And before I actually play it, let's look at the first part of it, because there's 3 sections. You have the rhythmic building section, you have the hard drop section, you have the climax, and you have the decrescendo back to where there would be a potential instrumental part or a ballad or something. Or let's say that this is a song that's not necessarily going to have a ballad in it. It's just going to have this one really hype part somewhere, right? And this is just an idea. But notice here that I have accents, they're different velocities. Once again, the 1 and the 4 of every 16th note set of 4 is emphasized. But if you go here, here's where the automation is. So this is a smooth channel volume automation that's going up over time. This is modulation X, which is the low pass filter. You can see that it is increasing, so it's opening, and then it decreases. And you have the attack time, which is going to be small because I don't want the attack to be very long. I still want it to sound like a shaker, like a transient. And if there was too much of an attack time, the sound would disappear because it is just a transient. So there is a world where you could have an attack time that's like, I'm going to reach my maximum volume after 10 milliseconds, but the sound is only 5 milliseconds long, so it's never going to reach that max volume at all, and you're just not going to hear it. So keep that in mind when thinking about ADSR. So let's talk about how you do automation in FL Studio. There are 2 simple ways. Well, 3 really. So the first way is you can click record with the mouse, click notes and automation, and when you play whatever sound or song it is, if you tweak the parameter that you want to change, then it will create automation, and that automation will end up in the piano roll. So that's the reason why all 3 of these are here, because that's what I did for all of them. So you choose the pattern, and it's going to be associated with that pattern. It's going to be the same if you do this and everything is in a song, because you obviously put all the patterns here. So, if I had pattern 1, pattern 2, you can see if I was to put it here, it has all of the automation that I added represented visually. The next way I could have done it is I could have said, well, I really want that to appear in the playlist and not in the pattern. I could have said, click this, create automation clip. The automation clip appears in the playlist and you can change it there. To delete it, go to initialize controls all the way on the left, and then you would just delete it there. And the last way is you could tweak the parameter. Go to tools, last tweaked. It's going to show you the parameter that's there, and then create automation clip. So that's how you would achieve a crescendo, and those are the different ways to do it, because you may want to draw it, but you also may not. You may want to use the tools that are associated with automation clips. And even if you draw it here, click the arrow at the top left, go to edit, turn into automation clip, but then you would have to do that for each one. So it would be easier to do that from the beginning if that's what you're going to do, unless you want to see them all represented together, because that makes it easier. Say if you're using something that's like contact, and even though you see me changing the note colors up here, and they are played by the same instrument, like in the syncopation videos with Flex, if I had something that had multiple instruments associated with it and they had different MIDI outputs or inputs, then different instruments would play. And that's the premise behind using contact from native instruments. And it's extremely powerful, because if you wanted to write something for a whole orchestra, you could write all of it here, like I did in that other video, and you can make sure that it's still different instruments, but that they don't interfere with one another. You could separate the channels in the mixer, and then you could EQ and use all the effects separately, and that is just awesome. Now back to the point. These are things that are aside. And another cool thing I learned, as just a tip, if you left click, then it's going to be wherever your mouse is. But if you right click when you are affecting this manually, then they're all going to conform to meet to the same point. See how it slopes? When I right click, it slopes. If I was to left click, then it would just be wherever my hand is. And because, well, you humans are just not that smooth, to be able to do that the way a computer does, that makes it easier. And I did not know that, but that's a very useful tip for me. I'll be using that forever now. So on to the audio example. And we can even look at the modulations. And I'll pull up the rhythmic part of it. So you have note velocity. Notice the velocity is changing. Which brings another important point. The channel volume is increasing here because the note velocities are not as steady right here. And I have them just doing their own thing. But over here, the velocity is increasing to create the crescendo and then the decrescendo. So there's multiple ways to do all of these things. You just pick the one that works best for you. So now the audio example. Here we go. So you'll notice from listening to the audio example for today that this section slowly builds. And this is the section that it has 16th notes in it. So that shows what I meant when I said you may want to have the feeling of 16th notes playing, because that's an awesome rhythm. You just don't want them to all do the same thing. Now, we don't have perfect volume with playing as humans because we're naturally imperfect, which is great for the sake of diversity. And here, this is a way to implement that diversity in a positive manner. So I have all of these somewhat inconsistent rhythms because they're syncopated. I have the channel volume increasing because I want the channel volume to create that crescendo steadily over time. And I want you to feel that this is becoming the instrument that is most important, assuming it was in a mix, right? It's doing this drum break that's right here. And it comes to a certain point where it's that loud. It crescendos again, and it gets louder because channel volume has increased. So that's like just increasing the threshold of how loud it could be, simply put. Then it goes to the max volume that I have allowed it at. It has these hits right here that are at an even louder volume than the crescendo ends on. And then it decrescendos because it's not the main focus anymore. This will be how drumline music would be written in some cases. But of course, it would be a lot more complicated depending on what drumline it was. And of course, the nature of ADSR, you can manipulate that so each individual note sounds different. And that's what I did here, because I felt like that was cool and it would be an awesome callback to something that happened video-wise a long time ago. Like, that was an entirely different series. I have playlists that are on my channel that link together all these lessons so that they will be like a curriculum and you'll be able to more easily watch them like that. So you don't have to wonder what order you should watch them in or how they're going to make sense or how to use that stuff. And every so often I combine all of it together or a bunch of it together. So this one is combining ADR, subtractive EQ, the part about high pass and low pass filters, and automation, which I really didn't cover in any type of extensive detail, but I mean, like, crescendoing is perfect for that. But also it's combining the idea of making an interesting rhythm that we've been talking about. So you can see that this syncopated yet stagnant 16th note pattern, because it is stagnant, that is playing 16th notes at first, but they're syncopated. And they're also crescendoing, so you wouldn't see them that way. So it's very dynamic because you've got like 3 layers of things to consider. And the fact that the time is changing, because here, it becomes sextuplets, then it becomes 16th notes again, and they're just big hits, and then sextuplets that decrescendo. So it's constantly evolving. That makes it very interesting. It's not doing the same thing, and it's, to a degree, it would be unpredictable to your listener. It would be something very unique to just hear in a song. You'd be like, wow, oh snap. And with that being said, I hope that you got some value from this. I covered a lot of stuff in this, actually a lot more than I expected to, but that's awesome. And so I hope that you're blessed by it. If you made it to the end, I thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and sub. And as usual, have an awesome day. Peace.